the formal split. The kingship of Israel will never be the same. We will have the formal split right here on page 128. Notice, first of all, we're going to bring in another character that we haven't seen yet. His name's Jeroboam. This is what also gets confusing, is Solomon's son, the next king of Israel. His name's Rehoboam, but he's going to have a showdown with Jeroboam, and it gets confusing, and so I get it. Their names sound exactly the same. Work with us here. Here we go. Rehoboam. Here's the role of Rehoboam. Rehoboam was like a cabinet member. He was like the Secretary of State or something for Solomon, but he found himself in disfavor with Solomon, and instead of I think he probably assumes he's going to get killed, he flees instead down to Egypt, and he's hiding out, Jeroboam in Egypt. This former cabinet member in Solomon's government is now hiding out in Egypt. And he is prophesied in 1 Kings 11. After God says, I'll take the kingdom away from Solomon, it's going to be given to Jeroboam, God says, which is very strange. You have this rebel who's now fled to Egypt, and we're going to see he's not a good dude. Let's keep going. Number 4, when Solomon dies, here's the key. When Solomon dies, Jeroboam sees an opportunity. He's a political opportunist. He looks and goes, this is my chance. And we'll draw out the philosophical implications of all this in just a minute. But first, let's let the story unfold. He's down in Egypt. He hears of Solomon's death, and he now hears that Solomon's son, Rehoboam, this is 1 Kings 12, 1-4, Rehoboam had gone to Shechem, for all Israel had come to him at Shechem to make him king. And Jeroboam sees an opportunity. He shows up on the scene. And Jeroboam is so clever. Look at what he does. Remember, he was a cabinet member in Solomon's government. He says, your father made our yoke heavy. This is verse 4. He taxed us a lot. We had a lot of burdens with Solomon as king. Yeah, things were good, but that's because he taxed a lot. He says, now therefore, lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke on us. And if you do so, we will serve you. Hey, make things easier on us and we'll serve you. I think Jeroboam knows Rehoboam. He watched him grow up. I think he already knows what Rehoboam will do, but watch as the story unfolds. Check it out. Rehoboam begins, remember, Rehoboam is the new king. He's Solomon's son. He begins wisely. He says, give me a couple days to think about it, and then I'll come back to you. So they go away. They give him the 3 days, and they come back. Now look at what Rehoboam does. The first thing he does is he goes and talks to the elders, the older folks, the ones who were with Solomon, the rest of the cabinet members. And they agree with Jeroboam. Look at what they say. It says Rehoboam took counsel with the old men who had stood before Solomon, and he says, what should I do? How do you advise me to answer? And they said, if you will be a servant to this people today, serve them, speak good words to them. In other words, lighten the heavy load. Bless them, serve them. Place yourself as a servant to the people. Don't place yourself above them. Serve them. Then they'll follow you and they'll be your servants. It's really good advice. They say, listen to Jeroboam, do what he requests, serve the people, and they'll follow you. It's interesting, all the books now on servant leadership, the Bible's been saying it all along. Jesus will model it perfectly. Now, look what Rehoboam does instead. It says, we've printed here, he consulted with his, quote, cronies. You can X out the word crony if that doesn't speak to you and just write this, his young idiot friends. He goes, okay, the old guys told me to do this, but I don't know if I like that. And instead he goes and he talks to his young idiot friends. And here's what they say. He says, what should I do? And they say, the young men who he had grown up with said, this is verse 10, thus shall you speak to this people. Your father made our yoke heavy, but you lighten it for us. Thus you shall say, my little finger is thicker than my father's loins. Now, this is a euphemism. A euphemism is a way to say something that's kind of harsh or you don't want to say and say it in a lighter way or a less harsh way. That's how a euphemism works. He's talking about his father's thighs, his father's downstairs. And he says, mine is bigger than that. Are you picking up on the euphemism? All right, I don't want to say it out loud because it is a euphemism after all. And he says, so in other words, he says, I'm a bigger man than my dad. And now he says, you thought it was bad under him. I'll make it way worse. I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips. I'll discipline you with scorpions. That's what the young idiot friends say. You should say that. What do you think he does? Look what Rehoboam does. And Jeroboam, I think, knows he's going to do this. Jeroboam's so clever. Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam. Hey, what'd you decide, Rehoboam? You're the new king. You're the wise one after all. And he went with the advice of the young idiot friends. And I just always pause right here in the Panorama class and give a note to my millennial and Gen Z friends, kind of us 35 and under people that are listening to this. Sometimes there is wisdom in age. We might even say oftentimes there is wisdom in age. And I recognize that our culture right now, we value the new and the fresh and the slick and the brand new thing. But there's wisdom in age. And if you're somebody who is older, and maybe you're taking Panorama right now and watching this, there's wisdom in age, and we need that wisdom in our church. We need you making disciples. We need you on the front line leading community groups and cell groups and hosting people in your house and teaching them what it looks like to trust Yahweh. We need you. And so we continue in the story. Verse 15, here at the middle of page 129. The king Rehoboam did not listen to the people. And notice what it says, for it was a turn of affairs brought about by the Lord, that he might fulfill his word, which the Lord spoke by Ahijah, the prophet. Now, here's what we're seeing. And I think this is the philosophical part of this split of the kingdom that I find so fascinating. I might ask it this way. Who is responsible for the split of the nation of Israel? Is it Yahweh God, or is it Rehoboam? And as the story unfolds, it's hard to say, right? We might even say, is God responsible for the split of the kingdom, tearing it from Solomon's son hand? Or is Rehoboam responsible in listening to the young idiot friends? The answer is yes. And what we see so frequently in the Bible is the Bible will give us a tension. I want to draw it for you because we're going to see the same tension when we get to questions theologically that sound something like this. Did God choose you? Or did you choose God in your salvation moment, your salvation experience? And what we're going to see, and I'll draw it for you, this is the way that I try to unpack sometimes these dense theological things. When we have, and we'll make sense of it this way, when you have theological issue, let's say A over here, and the box represents verses where you can build and prove A. And then you have theological issue B, and the box represents verses that you can put together for B. And these two things seem like they contradict, that they don't make sense together. Here's how you go into error. You go into error by either you destroy A and highlight B, act as if A doesn't exist. Or you do the opposite. You destroy B and act like A doesn't exist. Or you go into error by putting your head in the sand and pretending like, I don't want to deal with this, I don't like the tension. Here's what we have in 1 Kings 11 and 12. 1 Kings 11, God says that he will tear the kingdom out of Solomon's son's hand. We might say that this is God's sovereignty, his sovereign will, or we might even say the theological word for this is God's providence. God providentially declares, I will take the kingdom from your son Solomon. But on the flip side, we have Rehoboam's stupidity. Rehoboam and his choice to listen to his young idiot friends. And when you read the two accounts, so this is 1 Kings 11, and this is highlighted in 1 Kings 12. And when you read the story, you almost end by going, so who's responsible? I'm not exactly sure. The answer seems to be yes, God is responsible. And also, yes, Rehoboam is responsible. And I let this serve as a highlight for you and for me, because the way the Bible operates, it does not give us a philosophical treatise or a philosophical set of bullet points. And as Western thinkers, people raised in Western culture who think very linearly, we want to have things spelled out in bullet point on a PowerPoint or something. That really bothers us, doesn't it? This is giving us a narrative. And in a narrative, it's setting some tension for you and not necessarily putting a perfect bow on that tension. We, as followers of God, as Jesus followers, are going to have to experience some tension sometimes in things theologically, especially things that are presented to us in narrative. And I'm with you, I get it. I desperately want there to be, for God to have revealed an appendix in the back of our Bible that gives all of our big, tough theological questions. Here's one for you. How can God be all-powerful and all good and evil exist? You know how the Bible attempts to answer that question, it gives us the book of Job and then doesn't answer it. And there's it's a story, a narrative filled with lots of poetic discussion, and it doesn't give us what I want, which is a bullet-pointed Western answer. The question of God's sovereignty and human responsibility. What I want is a bullet-pointed answer, and philosophers spend hours and hours, and they've dumped thousands of pages on answering this question, and the biblical narrative is going to give us some tension. And we have to allow the biblical narrative to shape us and not necessarily impose on the biblical narrative our Western desires of what we want. But I'm with you. Trust me, I'm with you. I love 1 Kings 11 and 12 as it highlights this for us. And this is for us the split. Now here it is on page 129. When all Israel saw that the king did not listen, the people answered the king, "What portion do we have in David? We have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel. Now look to your own house, David." We have Israel now in the north, and David would later be known as Judah in the south. So Israel went to their tents, and Rehoboam reigned over the people of Israel who lived in the cities of Judah. This is the split. And what happens is this, and I'll draw it for you as you can see. Very immediately, here's the Dead Sea down here, here's the Sea of Galilee up here, and the Jordan River. Here's what we see. Jeroboam has a problem. Jerusalem is right about here. My map is definitely not to scale. This should be a little higher. Jerusalem's right about here, and that's where the temple is. The temple is where God meets with his people. And Judah will be down in the south, and Israel will be up here in the north. Jeroboam has a problem as the leader of Israel in the north. What's going to happen when the people want to go meet with Yahweh down in Jerusalem? They're going to go down to Jerusalem, and they will see the temple, and they're going to want to join back up with Judah. I've got a plan, and it's not printed for you here. It's in 1 Kings 12, verses 28 and 29. The very first thing that Jeroboam does is he sets up two false temples, two separate temples. He sets one up in Bethel, which is right here in the middle part of Israel, and one way up here in the northern part of Israel called Dan. So one here at Bethel, which means house of God. We should remember this is where Jacob wrestles with the man in Genesis 32. In Bethel, and one up here in Dan. And as we see this particular story unfold, here's what it says. The king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold. And he said to the people, "You have gone up to Jerusalem long enough. Behold your gods, O Israel." This is supposed to sting as you read it. "Your gods who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." And he set one in Bethel, and the other he put in Dan. Jeroboam will begin his reign by institutionalizing idol worship in Israel. And we're going to see that have massive ramifications as the story unfolds.